The waitress offered a free coffee to a quiet stranger, unaware that her kindness would rewrite the fate of 3 broken hearts. If you believe kindness can change a life, stay with us until the very end. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that heal the heart. The rain had fallen without pause for 3 days straight, washing the cobblestone streets of Charleston, South Carolina, in a quiet, gray melancholy. Locals passed beneath umbrellas like drifting shadows. Along the corner of Broad and Queen, tucked between a dusty bookstore and an antique map shop, stood Maple and Pine, a small café known more for its warmth than its profits. Inside, the scent of vanilla and espresso hung in the air like an old memory. The walls were faded brick, the chairs mismatched. A jar labeled "Pay It Forward" sat half full beside the register. It was the kind of place where time moved slower, and most people preferred it that way. Emily Carter wiped down the wooden counter for the 3rd time that morning, her hands moving more out of habit than necessity. She was 26, slight of frame, with chestnut hair tied into a messy bun beneath a faded green beanie. Her apron smelled of cinnamon and cleaning solution, and her eyes, light hazel, held the weariness of someone who had learned how to carry on without complaint. Behind her, the espresso machine hissed. Mr. Granger, the manager, stood near the back office door, watching her with folded arms. "You gave away another muffin yesterday, didn't you?" he said, voice sharp enough to slice the silence. Emily paused, then nodded. "Kid was soaked through. Couldn't have been more than 8. Didn't ask for anything. Just stared at the tray like it was a museum window." Granger scoffed. "This isn't a rescue mission. It's a business. You want to feed the world, start a charity." "I might," she said quietly, returning to the counter. Granger muttered something about overhead and storm costs before disappearing into his office. Emily exhaled slowly, glancing toward the front windows, where the rain traced long, diagonal lines like some invisible hand sketching grief across glass. Then, the door creaked open. The man who entered looked like he belonged outside. Rainwater dripped from his fraying coat sleeves, and his shoes squeaked with each step. He held a child in his arms, a small boy, maybe 3 years old, wrapped in a too-thin hoodie and clinging to a threadbare stuffed elephant. The boy's cheeks were flushed, not from warmth, but from exposure. His dark curls were damp and sticking to his forehead. They didn't speak at first. The man's eyes scanned the café, then settled on the counter. He hesitated. Emily smiled gently, stepping forward. "Morning," she said, her voice calm and careful, like she was addressing something more fragile than it appeared. "Rough day out there?" The man's voice was low. "Just one small coffee, please." Emily looked at the boy, then back at the man. The kid's sneakers were soaked, his tiny hands trembling around the stuffed elephant. Emily nodded. "One small coffee," she said. She turned, poured the drink, then, without a word, grabbed another cup and filled it with warm milk. She reached into the pastry case and selected the softest blueberry muffin. When she returned, she placed the coffee, the milk, and the muffin in front of him. "I think you forgot your second order," she said with a smile that didn't ask permission. He stared at the items, then at her. He began. "Rainy day special," she said softly, her hand already wiping down the counter again. The man's mouth opened slightly, then closed. His eyes glistened, but he blinked it away. "Thank you," he said, barely audible. The little boy, nestled in his arms, looked up and whispered, "Thank you." They sat in the corner booth, near the radiator. Emily tried not to watch them, but her gaze drifted, again and again. The man unwrapped the muffin with care, split it down the middle, and handed half to the boy. The child smiled, just a flicker, quick and pure, and leaned against his father's chest. For the next 30 minutes, they didn't speak much. The boy, now sipping milk, began to hum quietly to himself. The man watched the rain fall outside, one hand cradling his coffee, the other steady on the boy's back. When Emily returned to clear the table, they were gone. 2 empty cups, a crumpled napkin, the muffin wrapper folded like origami. But beneath the salt shaker, she found an envelope. It was thick, thicker than a receipt or a thank you note. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. Inside were 5 crisp $100 bills and a small card with handwritten words. "You didn't just serve coffee today, you served grace." Emily stared at the note, then out the window. No sign of them. Behind her, Mr. Granger appeared again, grumbling. "Everything all right?" "They paid," Emily replied softly, not mentioning the note, not showing the cash. Granger grunted and walked off, but Emily was no longer in that cafe. Her mind had wandered to the child's smile, the man's eyes, the silent thank you folded inside that envelope. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know his story. But she knew that something had passed between them in that small, storm-drenched cafe, something quiet and necessary and unfinished. That night, Emily climbed the stairs to her studio apartment above the old laundromat on Rutledge Avenue. Her knees ached from the long shift, and the smell of bleach from downstairs crept beneath her door. The heater wheezed, more noise than warmth. On the kitchen table sat a stack of unopened medical bills and a pill organizer for her mother. Mrs. Carter hadn't walked in months, and Emily had been paying off the cost of a defibrillator implant in monthly drips of sweat and sacrifice. She sat down, holding the card again. "You didn't just serve coffee today, you served grace." It was ridiculous, she thought, overdramatic. But still, her eyes misted. Because once, years ago, when she was 10 and hungry and afraid, someone had handed her a sandwich without asking why she had no money. No name, no agenda, just kindness. She had never forgotten. She placed the card beside the stack of bills and stared at it for a long while. The rain continued tapping on her windows, steady and soft. And somewhere, not too far away, a man named David Miller carried his son Noah through the rain, unaware that the warmth he had felt in that cafe was not just coffee or muffins, but the first sign of something he hadn't known he was looking for. Not charity, not pity, but a place to begin again. The morning after the storm, Charleston woke under a silver sky, the kind that seemed too heavy for bird song. The puddles along East Bay Street mirrored gray branches and rusted lamp posts. Inside Maple and Pine, the air was warmer, but the hush hadn't lifted. It rarely did in the hours before the city stirred. Emily Carter stood behind the counter again, wiping down glass jars that held sugar cubes and cinnamon sticks, pretending not to glance at the door. She wasn't waiting. Not really. But when it opened, and the little bell gave its usual shy chime, her hands paused anyway. It was them. David Miller stepped inside, his coat still too thin, but dry now. In his arms, the boy, Noah, nestled into his shoulder, one hand clutching the ear of his stuffed elephant, the other absently tangled in David's hair. There were faint circles beneath David's eyes. He looked older than he had 3 days ago. Emily smiled without thinking. "You made it." David gave a faint nod. "You open early." "I pretend to be," she said. "But the espresso machine disagrees." He smiled just barely. "Same order?" She nodded and turned to prepare the drinks. "Any allergies I should know about?" David hesitated. "None that I know of." Emily glanced back at him. "You mean Noah doesn't talk much?" He does, David said, his voice softer now. But only when he's ready. She prepared a warm cocoa for Noah, 2 marshmallows, no whipped cream, and the same coffee as before for David. This time she added a mini croissant on a napkin. When she placed the drinks on the counter, she bent slightly toward Noah. These are for the 2 strongest people I've seen this week. Noah peered at her, big eyes framed in messy curls. Then, in a barely there voice, he said, "Thank you." David blinked. His hand tightened briefly on the boy's back. They sat in the same corner booth. This time, David removed his coat and folded it across the seat. Emily caught a glimpse of a faded university sweatshirt beneath. Duke University, but too worn to read clearly. She busied herself with trays and receipts, but her eyes kept returning to that corner. There was something in the way David looked at Noah. Not just love, but fear. A tenderness wrapped in urgency. As if the child was the last thing tethering him to the world. The café filled slowly. A pair of college students sat near the window. A retired professor Emily knew by name ordered chamomile tea and settled into his usual chair with a crossword puzzle. David didn't leave when the drinks were done. He lingered, reading a newspaper someone had left behind, occasionally offering Noah a sip of water or a bite of croissant. Emily stole a glance every now and then, noting the way David kept his phone in his coat pocket, never once checking it. No buzzes, no rings, no notifications. An hour passed. Then, suddenly, Noah let out a soft whimper. David looked down. The boy was flushed. His curls clung to his forehead again. His tiny body trembled. "Noah?" David whispered, setting down the newspaper. Emily was already moving, instinct taking over. She crouched beside the booth, her hand reaching for Noah's wrist. It was clammy. His breathing had quickened. "Does he get fevers often?" she asked calmly, though her heart thudded. David looked startled. "No, not like this." "We need to cool him down," she said, rising. "There's a clinic 4 blocks down. I'll drive you." David hesitated, torn between pride and panic. Emily grabbed her coat. "Let's go," she said. The waiting room at Ashley River Medical felt colder than it should have. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The receptionist took one look at Noah and called in a nurse immediately. Emily sat beside David as they waited, coat still damp from the misty air outside. "She'll be okay," David whispered. Emily turned. She corrected gently. David blinked. "Right, sorry, habit." Emily frowned. "Do you have other children?" There was a long pause. "No," he said, then added, "Not anymore." Emily didn't ask. The words hung in the air, heavier than the rain clouds outside. When the nurse called David in, he rose with Noah in his arms. As they disappeared down the hallway, Emily remained seated, staring at a poster on the wall about childhood immunizations. Her mind raced. Who was this man? No phone, no insurance card, yet calm under pressure, gentle, measured, and yet not poor. Not entirely. She remembered the way he had folded his coat, precisely, as if trained to care for things most people ignored. The softness of his voice, the way he'd answered, "Not anymore." After what felt like a lifetime, David returned. Noah was groggy, bundled in a blanket, a small Band-Aid on his arm. "Dehydration and early fever," David explained. "He'll be okay." "Good," Emily said, standing. They stepped into the parking lot. The sky had cleared slightly, and the scent of wet pavement hung in the air. "I owe you," David said. Emily looked at him. No, you don't. I do, he said. You took time, risked your job. Mr. Granger already thinks I'm a liability, she said with a shrug. So, nothing new. David smiled, the first real one she'd seen from him. Why did you help us, really? Emily hesitated, then said, Because someone once helped me when they didn't have to. I was 10. My dad had just died. I hadn't eaten in a day. A stranger bought me lunch and walked away without even telling me their name. David looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. I hope you thanked them. I did, she said, by trying to become them. They stood in silence. Then Noah stirred in his arms. I should get him home, David said. You have a car? She asked. He paused. Not exactly. She opened her passenger door without a word. They drove in silence through the narrow Charleston streets, past old churches and gas lamps that flickered in the midday haze. When they reached the edge of town, David directed her to an aging motel, the kind with peeling paint and vending machines from another decade. Emily parked. David unbuckled Noah slowly, careful not to wake him. Thank you, he said again. Truly. Emily nodded, eyes on the cracked sidewalk. Then, just before he stepped out, she asked, Are you running from something, David? He didn't answer, just looked back at her with a quiet sadness that made her stomach twist. I'm trying, he said finally, to find something real. Then he closed the door. Emily watched as he disappeared into room 107, holding his son like something too precious to ever let go again. And for the second time in a week, she was left with more questions than answers. The following day, the rain returned. Not in sheets this time, but in a quiet mist that hovered over Charleston like breath on glass. The streets shone with a soft sheen, and the Spanish moss on the oaks hung low and heavy. Emily Carter stood behind the counter of maple and pine, her apron still damp from the morning rush. She moved with purpose, but her thoughts were far from the espresso grinder. Her eyes drifted often to the door, the one with the rusted bell that had, just yesterday, rung for a man without a past. David Miller had not returned. She told herself it was fine. People came and went. That was the nature of this corner cafe. Transient hearts passing through, leaving only coffee rings and folded napkins. But something in her chest ached at the thought of that little boy, Noah, tucked away in a motel room, warm milk forgotten on the bedside, fever receding, but the silence still clinging like fog to his father's shoulders. By noon, the sun broke through the cloud layer, dappling the counter with rectangles of light through the tall windows. Emily was restocking sugar packets when the bell finally chimed. She turned too quickly. It wasn't them. Just a tourist couple, rain jackets tied at the waist, asking for directions to the historic market. She offered a polite smile and pointed toward East Bay. But something about the empty booth in the corner made the air feel thinner. As the shift wound down, Emily found herself standing behind the register, absent-mindedly organizing the tip jar. That's when she saw it. A familiar object sitting alone at the end of the counter. Noah's stuffed elephant. It was small, soft from wear, one ear drooping, the fabric along the seams worn nearly threadbare. She picked it up slowly, holding it to her chest. How long had it been there? How had they forgotten it? Her heart raced. On impulse, she grabbed her keys, hung her apron on the hook, and slipped out the side door. Room 107 was exactly as she remembered, flaking blue paint, a bent curtain rod in the window, and the scent of mildew baked into the porch. Emily knocked, gently at first. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Just as she was about to leave, the door opened an inch. David stood in the doorway, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw unshaven. He looked like he hadn't slept. Behind him, the room was dim. A single lamp cast a cone of light over the bed, where Noah lay curled, asleep. "I came to return this," Emily said quietly, holding up the stuffed elephant. David took it, his hands trembling just slightly. "He's been asking for it." "Didn't mean to intrude," she added. He stepped back, opened the door a little wider. "You didn't." Emily hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The room smelled faintly of cough syrup and instant oatmeal. On the nightstand was a half-read children's book, its spine broken, and a nearly empty bottle of children's acetaminophen. She sat in the armchair near the bed. "He looks better." David nodded. "Fever broke last night. Finally got some rest." "I'm glad." He didn't respond, just placed the elephant gently next to Noah's pillow. The boy stirred slightly, his fingers curling instinctively around its leg. Emily watched them in silence for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know who you are, David, and that's fine, but you don't have to do this alone." David turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Do what?" "Survive," she said. "Whatever this is." A muscle worked in his jaw. He rubbed the back of his neck and moved to the small kitchenette, pretending to busy himself with nothing. Finally, he spoke. "I was someone once," he said quietly. "Not famous, just successful. A job that mattered. A marriage that mattered more." Emily listened. "She was a nurse, worked nights, strongest person I've ever known. We were going to adopt a second child, and then she collapsed in our driveway." He stopped. Emily didn't speak. Silence was safer than pity. "It was a rare cardiac defect. No warning. 1 minute she was laughing, the next, gone." He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the toaster, unplugged and dusty. Noah was too young to understand. For weeks, he kept asking when she'd be home. I told him Mommy went to heaven. He said she should come back on Tuesdays because that's when she made pancakes. His voice cracked. I couldn't stay in that house, not with her toothbrush still in the holder, not with the calendar still marked for school picture day. I sold everything, the house, the car. I withdrew the company shares, handed them over to my partners. I wanted out. Emily leaned forward slightly. "So you ran." "I didn't run," he said. "I disappeared." They sat in silence. The hum of the motel fridge filled the room. Emily spoke carefully. "That's not weakness, David. It's grief. And I think you've mistaken one for the other." He turned to face her now, eyes dark but focused. "And what about you? What keeps you from disappearing?" She shrugged. "Obligation, debt. My mother lives in a chair with wheels and a heart that only works if I can afford refills. I disappear. She disappears." He nodded slowly. "That's not obligation. That's love." Emily stood, her throat tighter than expected. "Well, I should go. You've got elephant duty, and I've got a closing shift." She moved toward the door. Before she could reach it, David's voice stopped her. "I left something in the elephant." She turned. He stepped over to Noah, careful not to wake him, and unzipped a tiny compartment in the toy's back. Inside was a folded envelope, thick. He handed it to her. She opened it without thinking. Inside was a cashier's check. $20,000. Emily's breath caught. "What is this?" "For your mother," he said. "I asked around. The pharmacy clerk mentioned your name. I called in a favor from a charity fund I used to support. She shook her head. You can't just... I didn't say it was from me, he interrupted gently. But it is. Her fingers trembled. Why? Because, he said, you're the only person who's seen me in months, and didn't ask what I could give you. Tears stung her eyes. She pressed the envelope back into his chest. David, I don't want your money. I wanted your trust. He looked down at his son. So did she, he whispered. Emily turned, this time without another word, and walked out into the gray afternoon. Behind her, the door clicked softly shut. But between them now stood more than silence. There was a wall, carefully built, decades high, and neither one of them yet knew if it would protect them from heartbreak or keep healing out. Charleston looked beautiful from a distance. Cobblestone alleys kissed by Spanish moss, iron gates curling like calligraphy, the ocean air scented faintly with salt and magnolia. But from the second-floor window of her tiny attic apartment, Emily Carter saw a different city. The cracked shingles of a laundromat roof, the groan of HVAC units, and the slow crawl of fatigue creeping into her bones. It was Saturday, her only morning off, and she stood in the kitchen holding a cup of tea that had gone cold 15 minutes earlier. On the chipped counter sat the envelope David had tried to give her. She hadn't deposited the check. She hadn't torn it up either. It sat like a wound, undeniable and throbbing. Her mother stirred in the recliner near the window, a knitted blanket over her knees. The hum of her oxygen machine added rhythm to the silence. Rough day? Her mother asked without looking up from her large print book. Emily didn't answer right away. I think someone's trying to rescue me, she said softly. Mrs. Carter lowered the book. Is that a bad thing? Emily stared at the check again. Depends why they're doing it. Her mother's eyes twinkled gently. Or maybe it depends on why you can't let them. Emily sat beside her, hands curled around the cold mug. He showed up out of nowhere, alone with a child, paid cash, has no phone, no job, so he says, and now he wants to cover our medical debt? Mrs. Carter nodded slowly, thinking. You think he's dangerous? No, Emily admitted. But I think he's hiding something, and I think I might be starting to care. Her mother set the book down and took her daughter's hand. You've spent so long doing everything alone, she said. It's okay to be suspicious, but it's also okay to hope. Emily rested her head against the back of the couch. Her eyes flicked up to the attic ceiling, where water stains traced delicate veins into the plaster, proof of storms survived. You know what the scary part is? Emily whispered. It's not that he's lying, it's that I want to believe him anyway. Later that afternoon, she returned to the café for her evening shift. The usual crowd trickled in, students on laptops, couples sharing lemon bars, a woman grading papers with a red pen and a tired smile. She was wiping down the back tables when someone tapped her shoulder. It was Lisa, her co-worker, 21, sarcastic, chronically online. She held up her phone. Okay, don't be weirded out, Lisa whispered, but I think your mystery man is wearing a Patek Philippe. A what? Lisa rolled her eyes. It's a luxury watch. My cousin sells them. That model? It starts at like 40 grand. Emily blinked. That's not possible. He wears a coat from a thrift bin. Lisa zoomed in on the blurry photo she'd snapped when David was leaning over to tie Noah's shoe last week. The watch peeked out from his sleeve. Round face, black dial, distinctive crown. I thought he was homeless, Lisa said. What kind of broke guy wears something that could pay off a year of college? Emily stared at the image. I don't know, she murmured. But the knot in her chest began to tighten. That evening, Emily walked home slower than usual. The city was quiet. Gas lamps flickered like fireflies behind wrought iron fences. As she passed an old fountain, she caught her reflection. Tired eyes, hair pulled into a knot, face pale under the halo of lamplight. She looked nothing like the woman who should be involved with someone like David Miller. And yet she wasn't sure if that was her fear talking or something closer to grief. Back in her apartment, she pulled out the check again. Still unsigned, still untouched. She opened her laptop, typed in the words, David Miller, Charleston. Nothing helpful. She added, David Miller, Duke University. Still nothing. The name was too common, the trail too cold. But one thought haunted her now. If he has that kind of watch, what else is he hiding? The next morning, Emily returned to Maple and Pine early, hoping for clarity and finding only more fog. The sky was pale, almost colorless. The world felt caught between seasons. No longer winter, not yet spring. She'd barely tied her apron when the door opened. David entered, holding Noah in his arms. The boy was smiling again, cheeks pink, elephant back in tow. Emily's breath caught. David stepped up to the counter. May I? She nodded. He placed a book down. The Giving Tree, the same one from the motel nightstand. Noah insisted we return it, he said. Emily accepted the book with a quiet nod. You didn't have to. David looked at her then, really looked, his expression equal parts wary and open. I think you know by now, he said. I don't do things because I have to. She narrowed her eyes. What do you do things for, then? He smiled faintly. Same reason you do, I think. Because someone once did it for me. She wanted to believe him. But the watch, the check, the hotel? David, she said softly, are you who you say you are? His smile didn't fade, but it no longer reached his eyes. I've never said who I was, he replied. Only shown who I am. Before she could respond, Noah reached across the counter, holding up a crayon drawing. 3 stick figures beneath a crooked sun. One had long hair, one had spiky hair. One was small, smiling, holding both hands. Emily took it. That's you, Noah said proudly, pointing to the one in the middle. David said nothing. Emily's heart ached. I have to get back to work, she whispered, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into her apron. David nodded. Of course. But before he turned to leave, he said one last thing. I never meant to confuse you, Emily. But when you've lost everything that once defined you, sometimes silence feels safer than the truth. He walked away, his son nestled against his chest. The bell above the door chimed, then settled. And Emily stood alone, holding a child's drawing that suddenly felt heavier than any check ever could. Outside, the fog began to lift, but the questions didn't. Sunday was supposed to be slow. At Maple and Pine, that meant quiet music, fewer tourists, and more time to refill napkin dispensers and reorganize the loose-leaf tea shelf. The sun had returned to Charleston, casting golden stripes through the cafe windows, illuminating dust like falling snow. Emily Carter stood behind the counter, pretending to read the day's specials chalked on the board, though she had written them herself. Her mind was elsewhere, in a motel room, in a crayon drawing, in a glance across the register from a man who carried his grief like a suitcase with no handle. She hadn't seen David or Noah since the morning he returned the Giving Tree. 2 days now. Not that she was counting. She was. Lisa, her co-worker, was humming to herself while grinding beans when she turned suddenly and asked, "So are you two like a thing now?" Emily blinked. "What?" Lisa smirked. "You and Mystery Dad. You look like someone who's waiting for the other half of her heartbeat to walk through that door." Emily tried to wave her off, but her cheeks flushed. Lisa leaned in. "Look, I'm just saying, the guy's hot in a haunted kind of way. But don't fall too hard unless you know what you're falling into." "I'm not," Emily began, but the bell above the door rang. David. And this time, he wasn't alone. He entered wearing a pressed shirt beneath his usual coat. The sleeves rolled slightly at the cuffs. Noah skipped beside him in clean jeans and a new jacket. They looked almost settled, as if something had shifted. But that wasn't what made Emily's stomach drop. It was the man who walked in behind them. Tall, in a charcoal gray suit, leather shoes, wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of man who never drank coffee from a paper cup. He gave a polite nod to Emily and immediately began scanning the cafe. "Mr. Miller," he said, stepping toward David with a hint of exasperation, "I had to ask the front desk 3 times before they told me which room was yours." Emily froze. David didn't meet her gaze. "I told you not to come here," he said under his breath. The suited man raised an eyebrow. "And I told you the board needs your signature by Monday." "Board?" Emily's pulse quickened. She moved around the counter, one hand gripping a cloth, pretending to clean a nearby table. Noah climbed into the usual booth, oblivious to the tension, pulling out crayons and beginning another sun-drenched masterpiece. "Excuse me," Emily said to David, too calmly. "Could I borrow you for a moment?" David followed her toward the back, just past the espresso machine. The staff break nook, tiny and tiled, offered barely enough privacy. "Want to tell me what that was about?" she asked, her voice low but not yet angry. David sighed. "It's not what it looks like." "Then tell me what it is." He ran a hand through his hair. "He works for a company I used to own." Emily's breath caught. "Used to?" David nodded. "I walked away. After my wife died, I left everything behind. Shares, title, my name even." "You own a company?" she whispered. "Founded," he corrected. "Medical software, pediatric diagnostics. My wife was a NICU nurse. It was our dream project." Emily stared at him. "You let me think." Her throat tightened. "I thought you were just—" "A father trying to keep his son warm," he offered. "Yes," she snapped, "and that would have been enough." He said nothing. Emily shook her head slowly. "So when you offered to pay for my mom's treatment, when you left that check in the elephant, when you repaired the espresso machine like it was second nature, you were what? Testing me?" "No," he said gently. "I was trying to remember what it feels like to be trusted without a resume." She stepped back. "You lied." "I never said I was poor, Emily. I just didn't say I was this. And that's supposed to make me feel better?" He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "I worked 3 jobs to keep my mother alive. I count change for groceries. I've stretched bills like paper towels. And you hide behind coffee and broken watches and you get to pretend it's noble?" He winced. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me what it was like, David." He looked down. Emily's voice dropped, tight and trembling. "I trusted you. I trusted the man who carried his son in from the rain. The man who never checked his phone. The man who told me silence was safer. She met his eyes again. And now I don't know what's real. A long pause. David finally said, Noah's real. What I feel around you, that's real. Emily blinked back a sting of tears. Then why not tell me? He hesitated, then said something that knocked the breath from her. Because the last time I told the truth, someone used it against me, and I lost everything. They didn't speak again that day. David returned to the table, gathered Noah, and left without ordering. The suited man followed, expression unreadable. Emily stood behind the counter until her hands stopped shaking. Later, while cleaning the booth, she found another drawing. This one had 3 figures again, same as always. But this time, the figure in the middle had a broken heart drawn across its chest. Beneath it, in wobbly letters, was scrawled, Miss Emmy, are you still my friend? Emily sat down in the booth, the drawing trembling in her hands. For the first time in years, she didn't know how to answer a child. That night, in her apartment, she opened her nightstand drawer. Inside was a stack of medical bills, her old nursing school rejection letter, and beneath them all, a postcard from years ago. A photo of a hospital in Chicago. On the back, in rushed handwriting, keep your hands steady and your heart kinder than the world expects. Dr. A. It had been signed by a pediatrician who once taught her CPR when she was a teenager working in the hospital cafeteria. She had held on to it ever since. Now, her fingers trembled as she reached for her laptop. She typed the words, David Miller, Medical Software, Charleston. And there it was, David A. Miller, founder and former CEO of Viridian Diagnostics. News articles, photos, a press release from 2 years ago. Following the death of his wife, Miller steps down indefinitely. A second article. Miller donates $10 million to Pediatric Cardiac Foundation. And a third. Where is he now? Emily stared at the screen, her world tilting sideways. The man she had let into her cafe, into her life, had walked away from an empire, but not from his grief. And maybe, she thought, not from her either. Yet. The next morning, Charleston was silent. The kind of silence that follows something breaking. A vase, a heart, a fragile trust. Emily Carter stood in the alley behind Maple and Pine, the back door ajar, her breath curling into the spring air like ghost smoke. In her hand was a folded printout. Not a receipt, not a resume. A photo. David Miller, in a black suit, holding a microphone. The caption read, David A. Miller, former CEO of Viridian Diagnostics, accepting the Lifetime Impact Award for Innovation in Pediatric Care. He had been smiling, but it wasn't the smile she knew. It was the smile of a man who belonged to a world she would never touch. When she stepped inside, Lisa looked up from the register. You okay? Lisa asked, noticing the tension in Emily's jaw. Fine, Emily said flatly. You sure? Because I saw your mystery man again this morning. He was standing across the street, with the kid. Didn't come in, just watched. Emily said nothing. She didn't look out the window. Didn't need to. She could feel it, the weight of him, waiting. 2 hours later, the bell above the door rang. David. This time, he walked in alone. No Noah, no coat. Just a soft gray sweater and an envelope in his hand. Emily didn't move. He stepped up to the counter, slid the envelope across the surface between them. She stared at it. What's this? Proof, he said quietly, of everything you wanted to know. She didn't touch it. He waited, then added, "I didn't come to defend myself, just to explain." Emily's voice was like glass. "You could have explained before." "I was afraid," he said, "that if you knew who I was, you'd only see the past, not the man I'm trying to become." She scoffed. "So you let me think you were struggling? Let me serve you coffee, wipe your son's face, make up stories for a boy who reminded me of hope while you watched?" His face tightened. "I wasn't watching. I was surviving." "No," she said, voice rising. "You were hiding, and I was foolish enough to think this, whatever this is, was real." "It is real," he said sharply. "You think I planned this? That I wanted to fall for a waitress who barely has enough to eat, who shoulders her mother's debt like a backpack full of bricks?" Her breath caught. His eyes widened with regret, the words already hanging in the air. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," she snapped. "And now I know exactly how you see me." "No," he whispered. "You don't." She reached beneath the counter, pulled out a small envelope of her own, and placed it beside his. "Your check," she said. "Uncashed. Unwanted." He looked down at it. She added, "You think kindness is something you can buy, but it isn't. Not here. Not from me." "I wasn't buying anything," he said, his voice rough. "I was trying to give back." "Then you should have started with the truth." Silence. The cafe had gone still. Even the espresso machine had stopped hissing. David finally said, "I loved someone once, and I failed her. Not because I didn't love her enough, but because I waited too long to be honest. I told myself I had time, but time ran out. And now every morning I wake up wondering if silence is all I have left." Emily crossed her arms. "You had a chance, David. With me. With Noah. With this strange little patchwork of mornings and cocoa and crayons. And you chose to let it rot under your secrets." He blinked, like the words physically hit him. Then softly he asked, "Do you hate me now?" "No," she whispered. "I hate that I miss you anyway." The words sat between them, delicate and dangerous. David stepped back. "I'll go," he said. Emily nodded. "I wish I didn't have to," he added. "I wish I didn't care." Then he turned and left. The bell above the door chimed like a funeral bell. Once, sharp, then silence. That night, Emily didn't go home right away. She stayed behind, wiping tables long after the cafe had closed. Each sugar packet, each napkin holder, every inch of that space had somehow carried his presence. In the corner booth, she found another drawing. She stared at it in disbelief. Noah had been there. It was taped under the table, carefully, like a secret. 3 stick figures again, the sun in the top corner. But this time, the middle figure, her, was drawn with tears. And beside it a sentence in shaky block letters. "I'm sorry. Please don't be sad. I love you." Emily sat in the booth, unable to stop the tears this time. She folded the drawing gently and slipped it into her apron. She didn't know what she'd do tomorrow. But tonight, she grieved what could have been. Across town, David stood by the motel window, watching the lights of Charleston flicker in and out of the rain mist. Behind him, Noah slept, one hand curled around his elephant, the other on a folded piece of paper. David had told the truth. Too late. Again. And this time, he wasn't sure if he'd get a second chance. Monday arrived quietly, as if Charleston itself was afraid to speak too loudly. The sky, now clear and pale, stretched like a blank page over the harbor. Emily Carter stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, adjusting her apron, her hands moving slower than usual. She hadn't slept much. The memory of David's voice still echoed in her ears. "Do you hate me now?" And her own answer, whispered more to herself than to him, "I hate that I miss you anyway." A truth she hadn't wanted to admit. But there it was. Her mother noticed her silence over breakfast. The air in the apartment smelled of oatmeal and warmed insulin. Mrs. Carter sat in her recliner, one eye on the crossword, the other on her daughter. "I assume it didn't go well," she said without preamble. Emily blinked. "It?" "The conversation you were rehearsing in your sleep," her mother said dryly. Emily exhaled, sitting beside her. "He lied. For weeks. About who he was. About everything." Mrs. Carter didn't respond at first. Then she said, "And yet, you still call him he, not that man. That tells me you're not done yet." "I should be," Emily murmured. "Maybe. But hearts don't follow logic. They follow echoes." Emily turned to her. "Echoes?" Her mother smiled gently. "You think it's a coincidence that this man, this child, walked into your café? The same week you said you felt like the world had stopped noticing you? Maybe the world noticed. Just not in the way you expected." Emily fell quiet. Her eyes drifted to the crayon drawing pinned on the fridge. 3 figures, uneven lines, messy hearts. She sighed. "I should go," she said. Maple and Pine opened that morning with the usual rhythm. Cups clinking, chairs shifting, the grinder whirring like a sleepy dragon. Lisa was already mid-rant about a customer who wanted half-decaf almond oat flat foam when Emily stepped behind the counter. "You sure you're okay?" Lisa asked. "You look like you got dumped by a ghost." Emily gave a half-smile. "Feels about right." She didn't explain, didn't mention the envelope, the CEO, the drawing under the booth. Instead, she focused on cleaning the espresso wand, on organizing the tea shelf, on pretending she was just a barista again, and not someone who had let a secret billionaire into her world, into her heart. Then, just before the lunch rush, she noticed something. A small, folded piece of paper beneath the tip jar. She picked it up, unfolded it carefully. It was written in crayon. "Miss Emmy, I drew you a new one. Please come see it. Daddy is sad. I miss muffins. I miss you. I love you. Love, Noah." Emily stared at the note for a long time. The handwriting was crooked, childish, but real, and pure, and unafraid of love. She turned the note over. On the back was a stick figure drawing of her, with a giant muffin in one hand and a heart in the other. Beside her stood Noah, smiling. There was no David in the picture, just the two of them. A child's way of saying, "Even if you're mad at Daddy, I still want you in my life." Emily felt her throat tighten. Her hands shook as she folded the note and placed it gently inside her apron pocket. She said nothing to Lisa, just continued pouring coffee. But something in her heart had shifted again. That evening, when she closed up shop, she found a flyer tucked under the door, a pale blue invitation. Community Charity Night. This Thursday at Maple and Pine Free Coffee. Free food. All donations support Charleston shelters and single-parent households. At the bottom, in small print, in partnership with the Viridian Foundation. Emily stared. She hadn't approved any event. She hadn't signed off on any flyer. Lisa passed behind her, carrying a mop. "Oh, yeah. Some guy came in earlier. Said you'd know what it was. Left these too." She handed Emily a stack of smaller cards. Each card bore a single phrase. Kindness doesn't have to ask permission. It just shows up. And on the back, printed by Viridian Diagnostics. Emily's heart fluttered with something dangerously close to hope. She turned the flyer over again. At the very bottom, scribbled in faint pencil, 3 words she nearly missed. Please come. D. That night, in her apartment, Emily sat at her desk with the crayon letter from Noah beside her and the blue flyer in her lap. Her mother was asleep. The window was cracked open, and Emily found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She wrote a letter. To David. No email. No text. Just pen and paper. She didn't know if she'd give it to him, but the words came anyway. Dear David, I don't know who I was more angry at. You for hiding. Or myself for wanting to believe in you anyway. I've lived most of my life thinking that love only came when it asked permission, when it had a plan, when it came with job titles and clean histories. But your son, he doesn't ask. He just gives. Without fear. Without shame. And somehow, even after everything, I think I still want to believe in people who give that way. Maybe that's foolish. Maybe that's faith. Emily. She folded the letter, placed it in an envelope. Then she lay down, her hands still smelling faintly of espresso and sugar. The world outside was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like something was about to return, something real. Thursday came with a sky the color of antique porcelain, pale, chipped at the edges with streaks of cloud. The breeze smelled faintly of salt and old wood, as if the sea were whispering things Charleston was not ready to say aloud. By late afternoon, maple and pine had been transformed. Candles flickered in mason jars across the tables. A small string of warm lights was strung across the back wall, casting a golden hue over everything it touched. A table in the corner held boxes of crayons, construction paper, and jars of jam labeled with children's names. At the register stood a wooden box carved with 3 simple words: For those who need. Emily Carter stood near the chalkboard, staring at her name. Someone, she suspected Lisa, had written it in looping cursive at the top of the menu. Tonight's special, Emily's Corner, where kindness begins. Emily's heart thudded quietly. She hadn't agreed to this, but she hadn't stopped it either. The flyer had circulated. Donations were already being collected. A small crowd gathered outside, mostly locals, some familiar faces from the neighborhood. A man played acoustic guitar softly near the window. A pair of teens handed out paper cups with handwritten affirmations. And then the door opened. No fanfare, no announcement, just David. He wore no suit, no watch, just a simple navy sweater, sleeves pushed to his elbows, jeans that looked worn in the right places. He stood near the back, hand gently resting on the head of a small boy. Noah, clutching a new drawing. Emily froze. Lisa leaned in beside her and whispered, "Go, before I drag you." Emily stepped forward slowly, the cafe alive around her in ways it never had been before. Conversations flowed, laughter danced, and at the center of it all was a boy holding a crayon picture like it was a passport to something sacred. When she reached them, Noah beamed. "I drew us again," he said proudly, handing her the paper. This one had 4 figures. One was unmistakably David. One was her. One was Noah. And the 4th, drawn a bit taller with a book in hand, was her mother. Emily stared, throat tightening. David's voice was soft. He said it didn't feel complete without the whole family. She looked at David. "You did this?" she asked, gesturing around the room. "I helped," he said. "But most of this came from people who know what it's like to need something. And someone." He stepped forward. "May I?" She hesitated, then nodded. David stepped to the small microphone by the guitar player. The room quieted. He cleared his throat. "My name is David Miller," he began. "Some of you may know that name. Some of you may not. That's okay." He paused. No theatrics. Just truth. "I spent most of my adult life building a company. I measured success in lines of code, in quarterly growth, in medical patents. And then one morning I held my wife's hand for the last time." Silence. He continued, voice steady. "Suddenly, none of the numbers mattered. The only number that mattered was one. My son. One child. One reason to get out of bed. One quiet hope that somewhere, someone still believed in people who fall apart." Emily looked down at Noah, whose hand now reached for hers. David's eyes found hers. "I came here with a broken heart and a suitcase full of regret. I never planned to be seen. But someone behind that counter," he nodded at Emily, "offered me a coffee I couldn't afford and a kindness I didn't deserve." He looked at the room now. "Tonight isn't about me. It's about people like her. About places like this. It's about second chances. About small corners of the world that remind us we're not alone." Applause rose, not loud but warm. And then David stepped back. Emily's heart ached. Not because she was angry, because part of her still loved the way his voice dipped when he spoke about pain. Loved the man who fixed a coffee machine and braided his son's hair with hands that once signed million-dollar deals. She stepped toward the mic, but didn't take it. She just walked to David, and without a word, held out her hand. He took it. Their fingers intertwined, not like lovers ready to declare promises, but like people who had bled quietly and were still willing to stand. The applause came again. But this time, Emily heard nothing but the voice of a child whispering, "You came back." Later that night, they stood outside the café, distributing food boxes to families in line. Emily handed out muffins. David ladled soup. Noah passed out drawings to anyone who looked lonely. A woman asked quietly, "Is that the guy from Viridian?" Another whispered, "Yeah, but look at him. He's not on a stage. He's here." Emily glanced at David. He wasn't performing. He was present. When they finished, the three of them sat on the steps of the cafe, their backs against the brick wall. The sky above was a canopy of soft navy, one or two stars flickering behind Charleston's light haze. Noah leaned against Emily's shoulder. David watched them both, something calm settling in his chest. "I don't know what happens next," he said. Emily looked at him. "Then don't plan it," she said. "Just show up." He nodded slowly. "I'm good at disappearing," he said. "Then try being good at staying," she whispered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out her letter, the one she hadn't given him but had left in the tip jar that morning, thinking he'd never find it. "I already started," he said, and beside them, Noah snored lightly, his head resting between two hearts learning to trust again. 2 weeks had passed since the charity night at Maple and Pine. Charleston was beginning to bloom again. The azaleas outside the cafe had awakened with a riot of pinks and whites, and the tourists were trickling in like rain returning after drought. Inside, the cafe had never been warmer. David Miller came every morning with Noah. He never skipped a day. Sometimes he'd help Lisa stock shelves. Sometimes he sat quietly reading, Noah curled up beside him with crayons and a muffin. But always, always, his eyes searched for Emily first, and every time she'd meet his gaze. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. They spoke softly now, laughed too. David learned how Emily liked her coffee, cinnamon dusted on top, no sugar. Emily learned that David talked in his sleep when he was worried, and she often found herself humming Noah's favorite lullaby long after they'd left. It was the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, it just settles. But peace, as David had learned, is never permanent. It began with a phone call. He was walking past Waterfront Park with Noah when his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "David," the voice said. "It's Marla Roth, from the board." His heart dropped. "I didn't expect to hear from you," he said, keeping his voice even. "You've been ignoring our emails," she replied sharply. "We sent our final offer. We need your decision by Friday." David exhaled. "I told you, I'm not coming back." "Well, the board disagrees," she snapped. "We've had 2 failed product launches. Investors are spooked. They want stability, familiar leadership." "I'm not that man anymore." "Then become him again, just long enough to steady the ship." David looked down at Noah, who was tossing crackers to a group of pigeons, laughing. "You know why I left," David said. "I do," Marla replied. "But grief doesn't pay salaries, and sentiment doesn't innovate." He didn't answer. She added, softer this time, "You don't have to stay. Just come in. Help us fix what you built, then walk away again." David ended the call without saying yes or no. But all afternoon he was silent. Noah noticed first. "You look sad, Daddy," he said as they walked back. "I'm just thinking," David replied. Noah frowned. "Don't think too much. It makes your eyes quiet." David smiled faintly, but his thoughts were loud. That night, he sat outside Maple and Pine long after closing. Emily came out with 2 cups of tea and sat beside him on the bench. "You've got that face again," she said. "What face?" "The one that says you're about to disappear." He looked at her and broke. "They called," he said. "The company. They want me back." Her hand tightened around the cup. "For how long?" "A few months, maybe less." She nodded slowly. "Are you going?" she asked. He looked at her, torn. "I don't want to," he said. "But I don't know if I have a choice." Emily stared at the ground. "My mother used to say," she murmured, "that there are 2 kinds of men in the world, those who run toward the fire to save others, and those who run away from the fire to save themselves." David closed his eyes. "Which do you think I am?" "I think," she said carefully, "you're someone still deciding." They didn't speak for a while. Finally, Emily stood up. "If you go," she said quietly, "I won't stop you." "But you won't wait," he said. She didn't answer that. She just went inside. The next morning, David sat with Noah at their motel. He watched his son draw a picture of the cafe, the big tree outside, and a woman with dark hair behind the counter. "Is that Miss Emmy?" he asked. Noah nodded. "She smells like muffins and hugs." David smiled sadly. "What if Daddy had to go away for a while?" Noah looked up, his mouth wobbling. "Why?" "Because sometimes grown-ups have to fix things they broke." "Did you break her heart again?" Noah asked bluntly. David flinched. Noah looked down. I want to stay here. David swallowed hard. Me too, buddy. By afternoon, he stood outside Maple and Pine, staring through the window. Emily was wiping the counter, laughing at something Lisa said. David took a deep breath. Then he entered. She looked up, their eyes meeting instantly. He walked to the counter. No words. Just a small envelope slid forward. Emily picked it up. Inside was a letter. I built a company once, then I broke it. I built a life once, then I lost it. And now, I've found something I don't want to break or lose. I'll go, Emily. But only if you ask me to. I'll stay. But only if you believe I'm someone worth keeping. She read it once, then again, and finally looked up. You don't need permission to stay, she said softly. His eyes searched hers. I'm scared, he admitted. So am I. He placed his hand over hers. Then let's be scared together. That evening they all sat in the booth by the window. David, Emily, and Noah, who had fallen asleep with crayon on his nose. They didn't talk about the company. They didn't talk about Friday. They talked about jam flavors and books, and how the sky looked like a watercolor someone forgot to finish. And when the lights dimmed and the café emptied out, David leaned in and whispered, I'm choosing this. Emily didn't answer. She just rested her head on his shoulder, and chose it too. 6 months later, Charleston was heavy with summer. The air shimmered with heat and honeysuckle, and the oak trees lining King Street held shade like secret promises. Children chased ice cream trucks, wind chimes sang from second-story porches, and in the heart of the old town, Maple and Pine was still standing, still warm, still full, but no longer ordinary. Now the chalkboard menu read, The Carter Miller Table, for families without one. Every afternoon at 3 p.m., a meal was served, free of charge, to anyone who walked in and needed it. No forms, no questions, just food, crayons, and a space to belong. It had been Emily's idea. David had built it. And Noah, now 4 and proudly in pre-K, had drawn the sign himself. Big hearts. Bigger letters. A stick figure of Emily with a muffin in one hand and a child in the other. No one erased it. Not even once. That morning, the cafe was humming with the usual rhythm. Lisa handed out orders at lightning speed while humming Taylor Swift. A group of construction workers sat near the window, eating blueberry scones and talking about gas prices. A retired teacher named Mrs. Doyle gave free tutoring to 2 local kids in the corner. David arrived late. Noah ran ahead of him, holding a paper in one hand and a peanut butter sandwich in the other. "Miss Emmy!" he shouted. "I wrote my name without help!" Emily knelt and took the paper, eyes widening. Indeed, there it was, wobbly but legible. Noah M. She kissed his forehead. "You're my favorite little author." Noah beamed. "Daddy says my middle name is for Mommy, but someday I want to have 2 Miss One for you, too." Emily's heart caught. David behind him smiled softly. "He insisted on writing it himself," he said. Emily stood. They met eyes. These days, their affection was no longer hesitant, no longer tangled with questions or regrets. It was simple, steady, earned. They had made a home, not in a house or a name, but in hours poured together like cream in coffee. One choice, one sunrise, one plate of pancakes at a time. Later that evening, they sat on the cafe patio, the 3 of them, sharing grilled cheese sandwiches and peach tea. The sun was lowering, casting a golden glow across the sidewalk. A man walked past and stopped. "Excuse me," he said, glancing at David. "Aren't you the guy from Viridian?" David smiled gently. "I was." The man nodded. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," David said. He wasn't embarrassed anymore. He wasn't hiding, just present. After the man left, Emily leaned in. "You know, you never told me what happened with the company." David shrugged. "They hired someone else, a real genius. Young, kind, didn't need me." "And that's okay?" she asked. "It's perfect," he replied. He looked at her. "I don't need to run things anymore. I just need to build things that last." She smiled. "You're getting better at that." He touched her hand. "I had a good teacher." That night, after the cafe closed, David tucked Noah into bed in the back apartment they now called home. It wasn't a mansion. It had no marble, no elevator, no butler. But it had a boy with dreams and a nightlight shaped like a dinosaur. It had laughter in the kitchen. It had crayons in the bathroom sink. It had love. And as he closed the door gently, David turned to find Emily standing in the hallway, holding an envelope. "For you," she said. He opened it. Inside was a drawing, 4 stick figures this time. David, Emily, Noah, and a baby. His eyes shot up. "Are you?" She nodded. Tears filled his eyes. Emily whispered, "I figured we could use another muffin lover in the family." He pulled her close, forehead resting on hers, and for the first time in a long time, he felt whole. Not powerful, not brilliant, just whole. A few weeks later, Maple and Pine hosted another community night. But this one was different. This one wasn't about charity. It was about celebration. The sign on the door read, "Join us for the Carter Miller family table dedication." Inside, local kids danced. Grandmothers clapped along. Single mothers cried over donated diapers and lasagna. And somewhere in the noise, a child's voice rose above the rest. "Can I sit at your table too?" David turned, smiled, and answered the only way he knew how. "There's always room at our table.